Hello, my name is Gentry Sorensen. I'm the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Field Agronomist for Northwest Iowa. I cover 9 counties in Northwest Iowa. It's denoted by Area 2, which is on the map. I'm housed in the Kossuth County office in Algona. I've included my office phone number as well as my mobile phone number if you have any questions. And also that first one there, gentrys@iastate.edu, that would be my email address. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Fred has asked me to visit with you today about utilizing cover crops as part of your forage system. I'd like to thank Rebecca Vidito and Mark Licht for providing some of the slides for this presentation. That was definitely helpful. When we look at cover crops, we see that acreage has grown dramatically from 2013 to 2015. This is an older slide. Also, I'll show you some newer data here on the next slide, but cover crops have helped out. They do reduce soil erosion. That mass of that rooting mass as well as that biomass is holding that soil in place and keeping it from eroding away or blowing away. It increases soil organic matter, improves water quality. It does have some factors in improving soil health. And for this presentation, we'll be talking a little bit about grazing potential of cover crops. That biomass would allow you to graze it and give you some potential of adding some feed sources for your operation. This is the updated cover crop acreage report from the Farm Bureau, and we're showing 17 through 19 years. We increased from 1.6 to 2.2 million acres, so there's a significant jump in acreage through those years. So you ask, why would you consider cover crops as a forage source? Certainly, if you're short on hay or pasture ground, this would be an excellent way to get into cover crops. If you're looking to increase your herd, and it does offer you the opportunity to integrate cattle and crops to reduce the costs in both those enterprises. This is some information regarding pasture rental rates. We can see from 2006 to 2016, there was a slight increase in the rental rates. So that integration will allow you to save some money. When we think about cover crop agronomics, the biggest thing is if you haven't done cover crops before, looking to start small, looking for those easy entry points. Those easy entry points are usually ways you can get in the field early in the season after the first crop has been harvested. So that's typically corn silage, seed corn, prevent plant acres, and that does allow you to get that cover crop established so that you're able to graze and forage that cover crop. So it's able to get enough biomass in the fall. Biggest thing with cover crops is to be flexible. Weather does play a factor when you're planning for your cover crop. So having that plan A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, it all changes with weather, how much rain you get, if you're able to get that cover crop germinated in a timely fashion after you plant it, and also how much heat you have on that cover crop and how long your season is after you get it established before it gets too cold and it freezes. When we think about cover crops, yield and quality, our forage type. When we think about grasses and legumes, our grasses are greater fiber and less protein. Our legumes and brassicas, they're high in protein and highly digestible. So those are our breakouts between those two, gaining an understanding of those. When they get mature, our cover crops get mature, the less mature is more digestible and higher in crude protein. And when they reach the reproductive stage, they decrease in digestibility and crude protein. This is a picture of some brassicas from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And this slide is showing some cover crops were harvested on October 16th, harvested at the same time, but the planting dates are different. The ones that are harvested were planted, I guess, planted on September 8th. You can see that cover crop is a lot smaller than those that were planted much earlier on August 25th. That brassica is much larger and there's much more biomass there on August 25th planting. This is an example of some winter rye cover crop. One was planted on 2003 on October 10th on the left-hand side and September 20th on the right-hand side. They're about the same height, but there's more biomass on the September 20th planting. About the same height, but it's more bushier and more biomass production on the earlier planting. So some definitions of cover crops and forage crops. When we think about what the meaning of cover crop is, a cover crop is the plant material does not leave the field through harvest or grazing. The forage crop is meant to be a feed, and that's going to leave the field either through harvest or grazing. So if we have a forage crop, we want to think about pesticides and pesticide labels and how that rotational crop restriction affects our grazing and harvest. The reason why is herbicide residual in the soil does hinder the establishment or stunt the crop growth. We use many residuals right now out there, and they're increasing in use rate because we have generally issues with herbicide resistance to some of our broadleaf species right now, mainly water hemp. So we're relying more on those group 15 herbicides to counteract that herbicide resistance that we're seeing in the fields. So therefore, understanding what the longevity is and your ability to rotate to a cover crop after your main crop is very important. So the way we do that is we look at our herbicide labels. But first, before we do that, we want to understand a little bit about some terminology and how herbicide persistence comes about and some of the main factors in that. So all herbicides, they do have a half-life. So essentially what half-life is the estimate of soil life under a range of conditions and soil types. And other factors that affect herbicide persistence are soil factors. Those factors are pH, texture, and soil microorganisms. Our climate is one that really affects our herbicide persistence. Moisture is the main one, temperature and sunlight. Rainfall really affects how long a herbicide is persistent. If we have more rainfall, the herbicide will not be as persistent because that rain will wash that product through the soil profile faster, and it will not be around because of that. If it's drier year, the herbicide will be more persistent and could cause issues with your cover crop. And also we think about herbicide properties, our chemical structures, and also vapor pressure. When we think about species selection, it's important to consider pesticide label restrictions. Checking for those crop rotations and grazing restrictions is really important. So there's ways to do this. You can look on either your herbicide label, or you can go to the CDMS website or greenbook.net. And we should also have an idea of when we intend to graze, whether it be in the fall, spring, and kind of have a plan of action and what we plan to do when we're researching this as well. So the label restrictions regarding cover crops, most of them are not developed with cover crops in mind. You'll realize this when you kind of go through some of the herbicide labels. They're kind of broad and not very specific. There is some additional information that I'll show you here later, some resources where you can find some of this information on finding some of these restrictions. This is the website, greenbook.net, where you're able to find pesticide labels. This is a really nice website. You can either type in the name of the label in the search area, or you can type in the name of the pest or the manufacturer in this area as well. And that will help you find this herbicide label that you're looking for. In this particular instance, I typed in the herbicide that I thought of was corvus. I typed it into the search area, and then I would click on this icon right here on the corvus icon, and it will bring you to the label itself. When you get to the label, what I like to do is make it bigger so that I'm able to see it. There's additional ways you can look at this. You can download it to your computer and save it for later, or you can print it off on a piece of paper and look at it that way, or take it out to your sprayer or take it out to the shop and look through that information out there. When we get to a herbicide label, we look for the rotational crop restriction area on the label. This is an example of a herbicide product called Lotus, common product that we use on cornfields. The rotational crop restrictions on this product, we see it's 4 months on cereal grains, and also grasses grown for seed. And they specify Timothy in this option. In the continuation section in table 3, they talk about the 18-month restriction. That'd be the middle section on your screen. We see it's 18 months for curbits and also some other products here as well. The biggest thing is all other crops. So if your cover crop is not listed on any of these areas, it would be listed as a all other crop. It would be an 18-month restriction at that point. So if it is an other crop, it does give you information on this label to refer to the field bioassay section of the label. And in this section, it will tell you to essentially do a test on the cover crop or an area or field to understand what the effects of the herbicide would be on your cover crop. This is a section of label that talks about flexstar. Flexstar and its rotational crop restrictions are listed below. Small grains, wheat, barley, and rye, it's 4-month rotational interval. And sugar beets, sorghum, or any other crop within is 18 months. So similar to the previous one we saw with Lotus. It does say on this label, do not graze rotated small grain crops or harvest forage or straw for livestock on this label. So be especially cognizant of those sections of the label when you're researching the chemicals that you use. There is a publication. It's Iowa State Extension and Outreach Publication Crop 3082B. And this does a great job of demonstrating information on herbicides and their interaction on cover crops, along with establishment, as well as the information for grazing and foraging as well. So this publication is free and available for download at the Extension store. This is a zoomed in version of that publication where it talks about corn herbicides, and then what the allowing establishment of cover crops for grazing or forage during the season of application. So we see if it has a check mark, that product is okay. and you're able to graze and forage less than 4 months after application. If it does not have a check mark, you're not able to do that. So in this instance, the Callisto product, which is a popular broadleaf herbicide for corn, would not be recommended if you're planning on planting cereal rye in this instance. This is some additional information on some post products as well, just to give you a little synopsis of that. Okay, the University of Missouri has done some research on cover crops, and what they did was they drilled some cover crops in, and then they tested the herbicides after they applied in June, early July, kind of our standard timing for herbicide application post-applied products. And they did come in back in and drill some cover crops on September 10th. They evaluated the biomass after they did that, and they did some stand measurements. And I've included the publication information on the link below. What they did was they found that the environment plays a huge role in the effect of herbicides on cover crop establishment. And rainfall in particular, when that rainfall increased, it resulted in less injury to the cover crop. And the most sensitive species that was tested, most sensitive species to the herbicide was tillage radish. And I'll show you some pictures here very shortly. Okay, so here's the carryover of post soybean treatment to cereal rye. In this instance, we can see the non-treated here. Looks very lush, and then you can see some very minor thinning of this cereal rye in this instance with a prefix product. So prefix is a mixture of dual and flexstar. And this is 20 ounces of flexstar up here. So you see a little bit of thinning in certain areas as well. Pursuit, you can see maybe a little thinning of stand at the top part of this one as well. Okay, then we look at tillage radishes. We really see the difference between the non-treated and the Pursuit, flexstar, and prefix applications. This is a greenhouse study that was done, and you can see the control versus the application of Hornet alone. Hornet's a popular broadleaf herbicide that's used in some corn chemistries out there. And you can see the damage that was done to the radishes or the brassicas in this instance. Okay, so this is just a picture of the non-treated annual ryegrass, just in reference to that. And this is 3 ounces of Zidua, which is an annual ryegrass. You see significant thinning, I guess, of this annual ryegrass to the Zidua application. Zidua can be used in corn as well as in soybean. So it's commonly used in some premixes of products like Zidua Pro or Zidua. So it's a common group 15 herbicide that's used. Okay, so we look at species selection. We think about the cover crop agronomics of this. Typically our grasses, those are our oats, cereal rye, triticale, and wheat. Our legumes, those are hairy vetch, crimson clover, Austrian winter peas. And our brassicas, those are our turnips, rapeseed, and radishes. There is some mixes and cocktails out there, but when we do have mixes and cocktails, we think about what's the goal of the cover crop. So just kind of having a goal and working around that goal to make your mix and cocktails is really important. Will the cover crop grow and overwinter? oats that does not overwinter. So if that's your goal is to have a crop in the spring, that might not be a good crop for you to plant, but it's an excellent crop within the state of Iowa. And also, how will it be planted or terminated? We'd be using airplane to plant it. We'd be drilling it. Termination, are you wanting it to terminate in the fall when it freezes? Some people do, some people don't. Otherwise, you would have to terminate in the spring through a glyphosate application. And also what the current and subsequent crop is as well. Having an understanding of what those are does help you in your planning. This cover crop tool listed here is a very, very good way to research cover crops and cover crop species. You can find it through this web address or just searching Midwest Cover Crop Council. And if you do that through Google search, you'll be able to find this tool. This is just a screenshot of this tool in general. So you'd start out, you'd fill in the information here. There's a drop down for the state of Iowa, and there's a drop down for the county that you live in. So you can alternate that. I just typed in Pocahontas in this instance. You can type in your goal. In this way, I put in mechanical forage harvest value and also grain seed harvest value. You can also put in nitrogen credits as well. So there's different ways. You can put as many goals as you want or as few goals as you want to really understand what you're looking for and striving for. So this is a really helpful tool that you can utilize. So once you have your goals in there, you would click search, and it will bring you to the available cover crops. So your goal fulfillment is rated as a 4 for excellent and 0 for poor. And as you can see in the search area that I used previously, it comes up with some good choices as far as winter triticale, spring wheat, winter wheat is another option. Forage sorghum is another option. And also gives proper planting times as well for these forages. So the green areas would be our reliable establishment, and our moderate risk to establishment will be our yellow areas. So it gives you the time frame when you should start to think about planting those cover crops in your area. You can also click on, in this instance, you click on maybe winter rye in this instance. So if you clicked on winter rye on this blue area, it would take you to some information on that species. When you get to that area, you can read about the different planting rates of these species. It has the rates of drilled, broadcast, and aerial applications. It also gives you a little bit of information about some potential advantages of this cover crop and some performance characteristics of that cover crop as well. So it's really a really helpful reference that you can utilize to make decisions on your farm. And I found this slide from the Iowa Learning Farms. It talks about some of the crops out there that are hardy, and some of them that are not quite so hardy. So our winter hardy crops we think about are winter cereal rye. You got to make sure it's winter wheat and winter triticale. There is spring versions of this, so if you want a winter hardy one, make sure it specifies it's a winter wheat and winter triticale. Our winter kill crops, oats. Oats are grown very, very easily within the state of Iowa. Spring wheat is another product that we can utilize that does winter kill. Our brassicas, which are common, people like to plant brassicas and radishes, as well as some legumes. Those do winter kill. So unfortunately, those products would be out if we're wanting to have a forage in the spring. Some of those that may be hardy, there needs to be some more testing on these, would be our annual ryegrass, hairy vetch, common vetch, and our rape seeds. This is just some of the data. I won't really focus on this, but this is just some cover crop species and some of the seeding rates, along with some of the approximate costs. It just kind of gives you some values, but really going through that Midwest Cover Crops Council website is really key to understanding some of those planting rates as well. But these are some guides that you can use too, along with some approximate costs. Okay, so here's the breakout of the cover crops in the state of Iowa. And this data is from the Iowa Learning Farms. And we can see the cereal rye is really our dominant species within the state of Iowa, with 90% of the acres planted to cover crops. 20% of the acres out there are radishes and turnips. 21% is oats, and 16% is other. That includes our hairy vetches, clovers, winter peas, cowpeas, triticale, and annual rye. And 15% of the acres are wheat. So that just gives you kind of a breakout. So cereal rye definitely is the larger of the group of cover crops on the market right now. This one is really important slide. In Iowa, we see that single species mixtures create more biomass before soybeans. Cereal rye is really the go-to for the single species mix in the state of Iowa. We can see the research farms in the state of Iowa are listed here on the screen, and we can see the single species is the same or greater in all these values. And this is a reference of 450 pounds of biomass. So it doesn't look like a lot here. Some years are better than others, but just kind of give you a reference when you're looking at this graph. So here's 450 pounds, and the highest one is close to 300 pounds of biomass in Northwest Iowa Research Farm. And before corn, we see some research farms show that mixes are only slightly better than the single mix. When we look at the pounds of biomass, that difference is not great. Therefore, much of the research in the state has been focused on that single species mixture because we haven't seen significant differences in biomass between the two. That is being a single versus a mixed cover crop. There is benefits of a cocktail mixture. Cocktail mixtures of cover crops give you the likelihood that something will grow, and it does provide a more balanced nutrient profile than some monocultures. And combinations of grasses and legumes or brassicas, they do provide biomass and greater crude protein in some environments. But if you're just looking for strictly biomass, a lot of times it's that single mix would be the best. Oats and brassicas seeded in a cash crop will provide late fall and early winter forage. Cereal rye, winter triticale, winter peas, hairy vetch, and those type of cover crops, they will yield some tonnage in the fall, and but mainly in the spring is when we really see those products, those forages really coming along at that point. Seeding methods. There's a few different ways we can do seedings with cover crops. We can either do it through aerial drilling, broadcasting, or interseeding. Each does have its pros and cons, but really it comes down to the weather really playing a big factor in our establishment. Getting that rainfall after we've planted is really helpful in getting that cover crop going. So sometimes we run into a dry spell. during that time of planting. So it does take a little bit longer to get established. Some of our keys to establishment: broadcasting. We think about the last week of August through the first week of September. Drilling, we're targeting before October 15th is what we're looking at there. Aerial or overstating, be 60 to 70 pounds per acre of cereal, rye, or oats. When we drill, we would reduce that down a little bit to 50 or 60 pounds. We're not getting that off target movement or off target seeding, so we're able to reduce that populations a little bit to 50 or 60 pounds. We like to have that seeded by November 1st. This is just kind of a same slide that we shared a little bit earlier, relating to some of the forage types and some of the maturity. Just to kind of review that a little bit here. Okay, so when we think about establishment in the fall with the right species, we have our grasses, brassicas, and legumes. We've got a little bit of a breakout here with a success rate and confidence on the right-hand side next to the forage species. The success rate is based upon how well it will be established within the state, what our success has been in the past, and maybe relating a little bit of that to the fact that oats and radishes, they will winter kill. So our success rate is in the moderate category in this aspect. Our confidence in this area, 3 check marks is listing as a scientific consensus, and a single check mark is merely anecdotal evidence. So there's not a lot to back that up. So as we know, we have a lot of scientific confidence for growing oats within the state of Iowa. We're very good at growing oats, but our success rate in this instance is not as good because it does freeze. We have multiple studies of radishes. It's not as common within the state. We do have multiple studies, but our success rate in this instance is only moderate because it does freeze off. Cereal rye, we do see a very strong success rate and very strong confidence. There's a lot of scientific evidence that goes about with cereal rye to give us strong confidence in this area. Okay, when we look at establishment, we have ratings for this as well. So we look at interseeding. Sometimes we have success, sometimes we don't. A lot of this is due to ability of rainfall during this time, and our confidence is merely anecdotal of this state of the game. When we drill, we have a lot of scientific evidence, or we broadcast as well. So our success rate is much better at this point too as well. So when we look at this, our grasses, our brassicas, and our legumes, we think about drilling or planting before September 15th. We're able to get in early. So we're looking for those easy entry points or early entry points. Coming in after we've harvested our seed corn, maybe we've taken some silage off. Those are early entry points in this instance here. We can look at grasses and brassicas. If we aerial overseed between August 20th and September 10th. And we're strictly drilling or planting before November 1st with grasses alone. So our cereal rye at this point will be our later planting areas. Okay, so all this information that was provided in these earlier slides is from the Whole Farm Conservation Best Practices Manual. This manual is a free download on the extension store, and I've included this information below. You can also go to the extension store, Iowa State University Extension Store, and type in whole farm conservation best practices, and that will find that publication for you at that point. Okay, so there's also some data that I like to share. It's on grazing cattle. This says beef cattle, but this is from the Practical Farmers of Iowa, and they're identifying the number of grazing days per acre related to the dry matter yield in pounds per acre. So this would give us an approximate number of grazing days that are available per animal. So we develop a cover crop grazing plan. Make sure your plan's flexible. Understanding the labor needs to maximize utilization, seeding, termination, additional fencing, access to water supply, and also determine the desired grazing period. After that, cover crop is established using a pluck test to determine if the plant is rooted before grazing. So a pluck test would be, you would allow that cover crop to become established, and you would go out and try to pull that cover crop out of the ground. Essentially, you're just trying to make sure it's deeply rooted and simulating an animal foraging on that cover crop, so that it's not pulling out of the ground. So make sure that cover crop is established first. So developing a grazing plan, fall grazing, you're targeting seeding behind silage, seed corn, early maturity soybeans. Utilize the fast growing species, oats, cereal rye, brassicas. But remember that oats and brassicas, they do winter kill. So factor that in when you're making that decision. But it does have a benefit. If they do winter kill, you do not have to terminate that in the spring. And when you do graze in the fall, there's minimal compaction risk when you're out there grazing because of the cold weather. Spring grazing, you want to see winter hardy species in the fall. Winter rye is the most popular. Some legumes can establish well enough. Research is being done with winter peas and hairy vetch with those legumes, and also harvest mechanical versus grazed, and doing that before the reproductive stage is very important. Soil compaction may be an issue as well, depending upon the spring, how much weather or rainfall that we're receiving in the spring. It can get quite wet sometimes, and compaction can be an issue when you're grazing your animals on a wet environment. Nitrate toxicity concerns may be uncommon, but there are animal health related concerns that need to be taken into consideration. Fields that have been heavily fertilized, either with synthetic fertilizer or livestock manure, there may be a risk for containing toxic levels of nitrates. This is likely more of an issue for fall grazing, but it can still be a concern in the spring as well. Sulfur toxicity is a concern, especially with brassicas, since they're naturally high in sulfur and low in fiber. It's recommended that they be seeded with a small grain forage when you're seeding those. It's also important to consider other sources of sulfur as well. Maybe they be in your supplements or feeds that you're feeding as well. So just getting an understanding of that when you're making that plan is important. And you can manage that by testing your forage and providing hay or other supplements to your livestock, as well as controlling animal intake as well. Okay, some grazing issues. Moisture content is an issue. Brassicas are about 90% water. And cereal grains are about 60 to 65% water at the boot stage. Corn stalks are about 8 to 10% moisture. Here's some spring forage values that I'll share with you. This data is from cereal rye collected from the fall 2015 through the spring of 2016 through the Lee Research Farm by Newell, Iowa, and the McKay Research Farm by Sheridan. In this graph, it's showing 19% dry matter. So this feed stuff is pretty wet feed when we're trying to graze our cover crop. The ADF and NDF values are low because the cereal rye is in the vegetative stage with not much fiber. The fiber will increase as the crop would mature. And this is some information that shows essentially the boot stage of winter rye. And we can see as the crop matures, the fiber increases in this instance. Okay, in this slide, it lays out several cover crops side by side, along with their harvest dates. Forage yield tended to be greatest between late November and late October. And after this point, many species began their reproductive growth, bolted or started to die off. So quality was the greatest early in the season when crude protein concentrations declined and ADF increased over time as that plant matured. So mowing cereal rye, mowing of the rye at the boot stage is really the most ideal for tonnage, feed value, and palatability. Harvesting reduces some of the concerns with rye, limiting soil moisture and nitrogen to subsequent crops. So getting that ryegrass off before it gets too dry is really important. You can mow this with disc bine, hay bine, but that drying can be a challenge because it is a moist crop. This is the Field scale for cereal rye. It shows the growth stages of cereal rye. So at the boot stage, at stage 10, this is the stage where we're looking at harvesting that cereal rye at. When we chop cereal rye, our max tonnage, we do get max tonnage when we let it grow past the late boot stage, but our quality is the best at the boot stage. So it really follows this graph that we see on the right-hand side. This is just some additional information from that cover crop tool that we looked at earlier that talks about the harvesting of cereal rye. And it talks about the boot stage in particular. And if you did harvest at some of these earlier stages. So it does give you some management ideas, management tips within this tool as well. So some general recommendations for crops following cover crops. We want to terminate our grass cover crop 10 to 14 days prior to planting corn. So we would consider applying fertilizer at or near planting with our phosphorus and nitrogen really is what we're looking at. Cover crop termination for soybeans should be done close to or following planting. We want to check herbicide crop rotation restrictions as well. And getting back to having that backup plan, we talked about how Mother Nature can really mess with us, mess with our best plans. So having that backup plan is really important. And then also scouting for insect pests as well. We do see armyworm in the spring when we do have cover crops. So getting out and scouting your cover crop, understanding what the pests are before you plant your corn and even after you plant your corn. That cover crop does give a area for those insects to lay their eggs and to propagate. So getting out and scouting that that cover crop as well as that crop you're planting afterwards is very, very important. Management for success may be different. It's not like a pasture or hay acre. It is quite different. So managing that cover crop does take a little bit of learning and understanding, but there is resources out there online, as well as talking to an agronomist can help you as well. We are still learning best ways to manage cover crops. Row crops and livestock management does change by farming practices or your individual farm. So people's farming practices do affect cover crops, and the way it is the tonnage that you get, maybe insect that could come in. All these different factors are related to that management system. And here's a little bit of information on termination of cover crops. Just giving some of that information on your glyphosate termination. So you want to terminate your cover crop using glyphosate. You use your full label rate and then apply when the days are warmer than 60 degrees Fahrenheit and the nights are above 40 degrees Fahrenheit to increase the effectiveness. So those are really the key dates or the key temperatures right there. And then also using high amounts of ammonium sulfate, that does help as well. We do have some additional dates up here at the top that talk about termination for soybeans as well as corn as well. So with corn, you want to terminate that cover crop before it's 8 inches tall and 10 to 14 days before planting corn. With soybeans, terminate the cover crop before it is 12 inches tall and 3 to 7 days before planting soybeans. So in summary, want to commit to planting quickly if you can when you plant your cover crops. Our maximum yields are obtained when soil conditions permit quick germination and emergence. And then start with a simple cover crop grazing plan. That one species mix is a simple plan, and you do get good tonnage off that one species mix. And another thing is be flexible. Things change, and we need to be as flexible as we can with those changes in weather and climate that do affect our cover crop growth. So that's the last slide I'd like to share with you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at my email. It's gentrys@iastate.edu or through my cell phone, 641-430-6715. So if you have any questions, certainly let me know. Thanks for being with me today. Thank you.